and so they focus more on existential matters or existential issues as they affect human beings. So the attention of philosophy was now taken away from dwelling on human knowledge alone to human existence. And so philosophers of the contemporary period would define philosophy as a discipline which makes it possible for us to resolve human knowledge. And so the goal was to take philosophy to every nook and cranny. Sorry, I think I made a mistake there. That philosophy is that discipline which helps us to seek solutions to the problems of human existence, not human knowledge. So they try to make effort to resolve every problem associated with human existence. And so they recommended that the goal of philosophy is to ensure that philosophy is taken to every nook and cranny of the world. Wherever there are human beings, philosophy should be there in order to interrogate and understand the problems associated with human existence and to try as much as possible to offer solutions to them. So philosophy became a way or a search for the solution to the problems of human existence during the contemporary period. So you can see that historically the definitions of philosophy changes with time from one stage of philosophical history to another. But the fact remains that irrespective of whoever is defining philosophy, there are certain basic features which every good definition of philosophy must bear. The first is that philosophy, is a critical discipline. Philosophy is a critical discipline. And so, philosophy makes critique. It enables us to, question ideas, question our beliefs, question issues, interrogate them properly in order to understand whether they are good or bad, right or wrong. In fact, whether they should even matter in the scheme of things depends on the questions raised by philosophy. So, critique or criticism is a basic aspect of a good philosophy. Philosophers do not swallow everything hook, line, and sinker. Rather, they interrogate in order to review and reveal more meaning and understanding to any idea. That is number one. Then two, philosophy is a rational discipline. It's a rational discipline because reason is essential in every dealings of the human being. Without rationality, man is heading nowhere. And so, philosophy questions everything based on rationality, based on reasoning, in order to ascertain whether an idea is accepted as a result of the right reasons or for the wrong reasons. And as long as these reasons are not logical and sufficient enough for anyone to accept, then it does not make sense. Such ideas are usually discarded, while the ones that agrees with human rationality are accepted. So reason is essential in everything that we do. Reason helps us to develop a kind of analytical ability also. As we question and critique everything, we're able to analyze them in the process of that and then arrive at acceptable conclusion. Then the third point or third feature of philosophy and a good definition of philosophy is that it is a conceptual discipline. Philosophy is a conceptual discipline. Now, a conceptual discipline in the sense that philosophy develops as a result of the fact that it grows by building concepts. The wealth of human knowledge cannot grow or develop without the growth or development of concepts. So, philosophy develops ideas or conceives ideas, and tries as much as possible to analyze them, to understand them, and to inject meaning or meaningful ideas into them before presenting it to human consumption. Then another point is that philosophy is a reflective discipline. It is a reflective discipline because philosophy is all about reflection. It reflects about any idea and about every idea at the same time. There is no philosophy without reflection. At every point in time, you discover that the human mind is equally always in a state of constant reflection. It reflects, consciously or unconsciously. It reflects about something or about nothing. But it is always in a state of constant reflection. So, as the human mind is always in a state of constant reflection, philosophy is that discipline which, helps us or enables us as human beings to equally always reflect about any idea. Such ideas that ordinarily people or some human beings might not bother about, but philosophy tends to reflect about them. Take for instance, if I open my bare hands and ask what is in my hand, anybody could look at it and say nothing. Simply because I'm not holding any object in my hand. But at the same time, what if I ask, what is nothing? Since what is in my hand is nothing, then what is nothing? Some people will be at a loss as to the meaning of nothing. What is the nature of nothing? How can we define nothing? Sometimes these are the kind of questions that ordinary human mind might not even think about. But as a philosopher, one tends to reflect about them. Philosophy reflects about them. For instance, about the nature of nothing. What does it mean to say that something is nothing, or that there is nothing in my hand? What is the nature of this thing we call nothing? Is it an emptiness? Is it the absence of something? Is it a nullity? What precisely is nothing? Now, it is the understanding or the meaning attached to the nature of nothing that will help and guide us in the course of our reflection towards making such statements. For instance, like, there is nothing in my hand. So, but these are things that ordinarily human beings should not, bother about or wish away. But because the human mind is always in a state of constant reflection, it could reflect about it. And philosophy helps to remind us about those issues we take for granted, that there is the need to always reflect about them, to interrogate them, and to understand them. This way we have a deeper meaning and understanding about the nature of the world. Then lastly, another basic feature of philosophy and a good definition of philosophy is that philosophy raises fundamental or pertinent questions, about nature and about human existence. In other words, the questions of philosophy are usually general, universal, or holistic in nature. They are not particular in nature. Now, what that simply means is that philosophy raises questions that are not only fundamental or general, but that are universal or holistic in nature. For instance, if I want to understand the nature, for instance, the nature of man, it is better as a philosopher to raise a fundamental question like, what is the nature of human beings? Philosophy is interested in the nature of man, that is, in the nature of all human beings. Philosophy is not interested in the question of the nature of a particular individual. The nature a particular individual, for instance, becomes the business of psychology, which interrogates, human emotions, individual human emotions, and how individuals behave under certain circumstances. But philosophy is different. Philosophy will rather ask, what is the nature of man? Bearing in mind that an understanding of the nature of the whole human race will give us an idea about the nature of every individual. And so, philosophy raises questions that are fundamental, pertinent, general, and universal in nature. Philosophy is not interested in asking questions that are particular in nature, but questions that are fundamental, holistic, and universal. Fundamental because the questions of philosophy are so essential that the human mind cannot just ignore it. And even when human beings tend to ignore it, it is only but a matter of time. When the vicissitudes of life visits, one will be in a situation where he or she finds himself trying to reflect, back into the meaning or reasons for those things he had, initially ignored. Take, for instance, questions about purpose. If you ask, what is the purpose of my existence? It is quite essential that we know the purpose or purposes of our existence. Because if we do not know, we will continue to, chase shadows around the universe, to wander from one spot to another without actually making a necessary impact in our lives. But if we understand the purpose for which we exist, it will enable us to actually find meaning and interest in everything that happens around us. And as such, we'll be able to make proper impact in our environment. So questions about purpose, meaning of existence, and so on are not questions that the ordinary human mind can ignore. But even when it chooses to ignore it, it is only but for a while. One day, when the real need appears, you discover that one will have no choice than to go back, to answer or reflect about those questions in order to make progress. So that's why philosophy is a fundamental discipline which interrogates reality holistically and not particularly. So that is that. Now, having said this, what can we take as our own standard definition of philosophy in this class? I would answer that question by saying that philosophy is a critical, rational, and reflective discipline which raises general or fundamental questions pertaining to nature and to human existence. Philosophy is a critical, rational, and reflective discipline which raises general, fundamental questions pertaining to nature and to human existence. Now, this definition, comes from the various features or characteristics of philosophy which are already outlined earlier. That every good definition of philosophy must bear some or all of these characteristics in order to make a good definition of philosophy, in order to, engender what we refer to as philosophy. So, this definition actually takes cognizance of the fact that philosophy is a critical discipline, it is a rational discipline, it is a reflective discipline, it's a conceptual discipline, and it is a discipline which raises general fundamental questions pertaining to nature and to human existence. So, if for instance one is asked anywhere, what is philosophy? You should be able to give this standard definition of philosophy. At least in this contemporary time, one should be able to say that philosophy is a critical, rational, and reflective discipline which raises fundamental or general questions pertaining to nature and to human existence. So, having said that, we take this definition as our last point regarding the concept of philosophy, and then we'll now move into the second phase of our lecture for the day, which is a brief history of philosophy. Brief history of philosophy in the sense that if we are to discuss the entire history of philosophy, even a whole year's work would not be able to contain, that is, a whole year's class will not be able to give us the opportunity to finish that discussion. And so we will not delve deeper into the history of philosophy, but we shall make brief, history, so as to enable us to understand where philosophy is coming from, and derive some lessons or draw some lessons from them, and know how it will help us in the present time and how we can proceed in the future. Now, brief history of philosophy. What we refer to as philosophy today, comes from two Greek words, philo and sophia, meaning love and wisdom. Those words were dated back to the 6th century BC. 6th century BC. As at the 6th century BC, there was a man named Thales of Miletus. Thales of Miletus. Remember, the Greeks don't bear surnames. So the name of the person was Thales, Thales. But the word Miletus was added because that was a town in which he lived, just to differentiate him from some other Thales that were Greek citizens. And so he was named Thales of Miletus. Now, Thales of Miletus was just an ordinary citizen who was living his life like a normal Greek citizen. He lived and was brought up under the tutelage of his parents, drawing inspiration from Greek cultural traditions. However, at a certain point in his life, he began to question the traditions of his own people, the traditions of the Greeks. He had initially believed in the traditional religion of the Greeks as a way of explaining reality, as a way of explaining all the mysteries that surrounded his existence. However, at a certain stage in his life, he felt that it was necessary to interrogate the cultural beliefs of his own people in order to ascertain whether they were actually right or wrong. And so, from that moment, Thales of Miletus asserted that from that moment he would no longer believe, anything to be true unless it was based on rational grounds. In other words, there are rational evidence to be able to do so. Secondly, that he would not believe anything unless it was based on critical observation. In other words, he made critical observation his methodology of ascertaining anything to be true or false, or to be real or unreal. And these conclusions were drawn from the fact that before then, the average Greek citizen would attribute any mystery, to the power of the gods and the goddesses, which were the only means of interpreting reality among them. Because traditional religion was the only means of explaining the mysteries that surrounded the Greek people. So, even Thessalonians had believed that earlier, but at a certain point he began to question himself and asked one fundamental question: what if the gods were wrong? Remember that every what do you call it now? Remember that every chief priest, that is, every oracle rather, needs the service of a chief priest to be able to interpret its mind to the people. So oracles were represented by human agents, in those days. And these human agents are not infallible. They are human beings, and so they could make mistakes. Now, if one goes to the oracle to ascertain the mind of the oracle over any mystery that he or she does not understand, and the chief priest decides to interpret the mind of the oracle and goes wrong, what happens? How do we ascertain that? And who we know? So these were some of the things that actually bothered Thessalonians and at the same time fascinated him. And he raised the fundamental question: what if the gods were wrong? How do we know? So based on that, he realized the fact that human beings are fallible and could make mistakes, and that since the oracles were represented by human agents, there is the need to interrogate them further to be sure that whatever reality found as a result of visiting oracles were actually true as speculated. So based on that, he decided to jettison the culture and tradition of his own people and focused on understanding reality based on critical observation. That's why he said, henceforth, I shall make critical observation, a method of reality, of understanding reality. And from that moment he did. Now the first step he took was to investigate the nature, or rather to investigate the reality, the basic reality that is fundamental for everything that exists. Because he had observed that this universe is a universe of mystery, full of wonders, full of surprises, and there is nobody who is well positioned to understand everything at the same time. And so what do? He said we need to interrogate or investigate reality. And in order to do that, he was looking for that fundamental element, according to him, which is responsible for everything that we see in the universe. And what was it? He calls it basic stuff of reality. The basic stuff of reality, or the organizing principle of the universe. What is that single stuff or single element which is more essential than every other thing we can find, or that is responsible for everything that exists in the universe? Now he started by trying to find out whether there is one single element that is common, to everything that is alive. Because life is sacrosanct, and life is the first, thing, that is essential in nature. And so, what do we do? He said we need to investigate what makes life possible. Now, in the course of that investigation, he found out that one single thing that exists among all living things is the fact that there are substances that keeps them alive. And one of such essential substances which makes all living things living is the fact that they contain moisture or water. So moisture became for him the basic foundation of reality. The fact that everything living, including human beings, contains moisture. The human body contains moisture. The human blood contains moisture. Grasses, animals, whatever, plants need moisture to be able to be alive. So he now felt that the simple conclusion is that moisture or water, or some authors would call it vapor, is essential for life, and so it is the fundamental or basic stuff of reality, fundamental element of reality, or the basic stuff of reality. That was his conclusion. As simple as that conclusion sounded, it became the foundation of what we call philosophy today. In other words, it opened the avenue for further interrogations into the world of philosophy. Now, Thales of Miletus was such a great man and a great genius in the world of philosophy that he did not only talk about, understanding reality alone. He was a living reality himself, in the sense that, though being a philosopher, his understanding of the galaxy, the outer space as a whole, made him very, very unique and essential. He could look at the position of the stars, and foretell what will happen in future. So he was a great astronomer. He taught himself the science of astronomy and astrology, and so was able to use the science of astronomy and astrology to foretell future events. For instance, he was said to be the first person to predict the first eclipse of the moon in 585 BC. And exactly at that point in time, the first eclipse of the moon occurred as a result of his understanding of astronomy and astrology. Secondly, Thales of Miletus was equally said that, the business of philosophy is not to make wealth or to make money, but to increase human knowledge and to propagate human knowledge. Recall that I told you from the very beginning that the business of philosophy is to liquidate ignorance and to cultivate the human intellect. That was exactly what Thales of Miletus equally believed too. And so, when people made jest of him about the fact that he knew so much about the world and about the universe, yet he remained so poor and wretched all through his life, they wonder why a man who has such wealth of knowledge would live a poor life. He answered by saying that his business, or his calling rather, was to improve human knowledge and to teach men to know, not to acquire wealth. That if he had wanted or chosen to acquire wealth, he would have been the richest man who ever lived. But that, because that was not his calling, he decided to avoid that. And so, to prove his point, because people did not believe him, he said, okay, that he was going to prove to the world that he would have been the richest man if he ever wanted. And so one day, he woke up, and on his way to the market, he stopped, stood at a point and was gazing at the position of the stars to the extent that, he fell into trance. That is to say, he lost total consciousness and was like a dead wood as a result of the fact that he was reflecting about philosophy and thinking about, how to foretell future events as a result of the position of the stars. So he stood at a particular point and was looking at the position of the stars until market women who went to the market in the morning returned back in the evening and met him at that same spot. And they were wondering, what is wrong with this man? Why has he suddenly become immobile? They never knew that he was thinking about the problems of the world.